What happens when the legacy of a beloved icon is suddenly torn from her grandson's hands? What if the keeper of that legacy is someone no one expected would strike the final blow, Princess Diana's own sister? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Those were the whispered words floating through British corridors of power, palace walls, and celebrity-filled lounges in Montecito. Not a tabloid rumor, not a clickbait headline, but a truth that hit like a thunderclap across both royalist and anti-royalist factions around the globe. Something irreversible had happened. And for once, the drama didn't start with Meghan Markle. It landed on her like a ton of bricks. Because in the middle of legal wranglings, family estrangement, and relentless public scrutiny, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, the older sister of the late Princess Diana, made a bold, brutal, and unthinkable move. She stripped Archie Harrison, Diana's grandson, of a portion of his rightful inheritance from Diana's estate. And when Meghan Markle found out, she reportedly screamed, sobbed, and shattered a priceless crystal vase in their $14 million Montecito mansion. But this story doesn't begin with shattered glass. It begins with shattered trust. To understand the full weight of this moment, you have to go back, decades back, to a time before Meghan, before Harry grew a beard, before the firm was something you left. Princess Diana wasn't just a royal. She was a symbol, a force of nature, a global icon of empathy and rebellion. But above all, she was a mother, and she built her estate with them in mind, William and Harry, and, through them, her grandchildren. In 1997, after her tragic death in Paris, Diana left behind an estate worth an estimated £21 million, most of which would eventually be distributed to her sons. It was a carefully thought-out will, updated months before her death, with one clause that would go mostly unnoticed until now, a clause that appointed her sister, Lady Sarah, as a guardian over parts of the estate intended for future grandchildren. At the time, the clause seemed poetic, a symbol of sisterhood and trust. Diana, always cautious of the manipulations inside the monarchy, placed her faith in someone she believed would understand the essence of her values and protect them. That clause remained dormant, unquestioned, sealed in time, until now. Fast forward to the age of headlines and hashtags. Meghan Markle's arrival into the royal family was like a lightning bolt, powerful, dazzling, and divisive. She was praised for her independence and grace, then vilified for her defiance and demands. And when she and Harry made the unprecedented move to step back from royal duties in 2020, the monarchy shook. But behind the palace curtains, something far more fragile was already beginning to crack. Lady Sarah's confidence that Diana's grandchildren were being raised with the values Diana cherished. Unlike the Queen or Prince Charles, Lady Sarah had no throne to worry about. No press briefings. No PR team. She had memories. Letters. Promises. Diana's voice preserved in ink, conversation, and memory. And when Meghan and Harry relocated to California, launched a media empire, accused the royal family of racism, and began building a narrative that, in many eyes, leaned on Diana's legacy for personal branding, Lady Sarah saw red flags. According to a source close to the McCorquodale family, Sarah believed Diana's legacy was becoming a currency. She felt that what Diana stood for, humility, empathy, selfless service, was being misinterpreted or, worse, repackaged for profit. Was Lady Sarah right? Or was she blinded by old-fashioned loyalty and protective instinct? The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. The day the hammer fell, it came suddenly, without warning. Meghan was reportedly preparing for a new podcast episode when her legal team received an envelope marked private and confidential. Inside, notification that Lady Sarah had activated her discretionary powers over Diana's trust for grandchildren and revoked Archie Harrison's rights to access key heirlooms and funds. According to insiders, Meghan was apoplectic. She believed it was a bluff, a bitter relative clinging to tradition. But the paperwork was ironclad. Legal. Binding. A private legal call between Meghan's team and Lady Sarah's solicitor lasted less than 8 minutes. Lady Sarah wasn't backing down. She acted with calm deliberation, a legal expert familiar with the case revealed. This wasn't spontaneous. This was years in the making. She was watching, waiting. And when the moment came, she struck with precision. But why now? Why not years ago, when Archie was born? Or when the Sussexes first left the royal fold? Because of what happened weeks before the revocation, something Meghan said during an interview that didn't make the final cut but did get back to Lady Sarah. We'll cover that in Chapter 4. Was it personal? Or was it protection? The media spun the story in every direction. Lady Sarah McCorquodale just declared war on Meghan Markle and strips Diana's grandson of inheritance, revenge, or righteousness? Princess Diana's dying wishes betrayed or fulfilled? But Lady Sarah remained silent. For now, friends close to her insist this wasn't about Meghan. It was about Diana, protecting her soul, her memory, and yes, her estate. Sarah always said Diana was prophetic, that she could sense betrayal before it happened, one of Diana's school friends told us. I think Sarah feels she's doing what Diana would have done had she lived. That, of course, is speculation. But the consequences? Those are very real. Meghan's fury, the glass vase incident. Multiple sources inside Meghan and Harry's household claim that when the news was delivered, Meghan went into a tailspin. She had just finished a video call with Spotify executives. She was wearing a pastel pink silk blouse, hair perfectly waved, a smile she had mastered for the camera. Then she read the letter. According to the household staff, she stood silently for 10 seconds, then screamed, "How dare she?" What followed was a tirade, culminating in Meghan throwing a vase across the room, shattering it against the fireplace. Harry reportedly tried to console her, saying, "We'll sort this out. There has to be a mistake." But there wasn't. For the first time, Diana's legacy was no longer a shield. It had become a sword. The questions that remain: was Archie Harrison unfairly punished for his parents' choices? Was Lady Sarah exercising loyalty or vengeance? Did Diana truly intend for her inheritance to come with moral conditions? And what really happened in those letters between Diana and Sarah? As the royal family reels from yet another chapter of internal war, the public is left asking, when does karma stop being justice and start becoming cruelty? And Meghan? She's not done. She's reportedly considering a televised rebuttal, a sit-down unlike anything we've seen before. One where she'll speak not just as a mother, but as a woman scorned. In the quiet stillness of Althorpe House, where the air hums with history and the trees whisper stories from a bygone era, rests the final earthly reminder of a woman whose life still echoes through generations, Princess Diana. Her legacy is not just bound by the marble on her memorial or the water surrounding her grave site. It breathes in the lives she touched, the movements she inspired, and, most controversially now, the inheritance she left behind. Princess Diana was many things to many people. A princess, a humanitarian, a fashion icon, a disruptor. But to those who knew her intimately, to those whose lives orbited her private world, she was a protector, a mother, a woman who felt deeply, loved fiercely, and feared more than anything that the system she married into would swallow her sons whole. When Diana tragically died in that Paris tunnel on August 31st, 1997, the world mourned in a way it hadn't for any public figure before. Her funeral procession drew crowds in the millions. Her loss was more than personal. It felt like a public wound. And yet, amidst the tears, tributes, and flower-covered gates at Kensington Palace, a more practical matter quietly moved through legal channels: the execution of her will. Diana's estate at the time was worth an estimated £21 million. After taxes, debts, and a few smaller bequests, what remained was largely set aside for her two sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. The common understanding was that the fortune would be held in trust and accessed by the boys upon reaching their mid to late 20s. But what was not common knowledge, at least not to the public, was the presence of a clause, small in word count, enormous in consequence, that gave her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, oversight over the discretionary portions of the estate earmarked for future generations. This clause was not added by accident. It was deliberate. Some believe Diana saw things coming before the rest of the world did. That the whispers she shared with her closest friends about feeling haunted, about not trusting the royal institution, were not paranoia but prophecy. And in those final months, amid her divorce and the changing shape of her life, Diana made preparations not just for her sons, but for their children and the legacy they would inherit. Lady Sarah, the elder sister, was the one Diana confided in more than anyone. Though Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, has often spoken on her behalf in public commemorations, it was Sarah who bore witness to Diana's private battles. Sarah had once dated Prince Charles before Diana, though their romantic involvement was short-lived and cordial. When Diana entered the royal family, it was Sarah who helped her navigate the treacherous waters. When Diana cried at night, it was often Sarah who answered the phone. By assigning her sister to this particular clause, Diana was signaling something: protection. Not just from the palace or the press, but from the future. from unknowns she feared would twist her legacy into something unrecognizable. The question no one wanted to ask back then was, what if that future did arrive? Now, it seems it has. The importance of Diana's estate cannot be overstated. It is not merely about money. It's about access, influence, heritage. Diana's belongings included a jewelry collection with irreplaceable historical value, letters, photographs, handwritten notes, and symbolic items that told the story of her life. These were not simply treasures, they were statements. Each item a piece of a puzzle that helped define who she was and what she stood for. Among these treasures was the famed sapphire and diamond engagement ring, which now rests on the hand of Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales. There was also the Cartier watch Diana wore religiously, later gifted to Meghan Markle, though whether it remains in her possession is now in question. And then there were more personal heirlooms, less flashy but more intimate, letters to friends, sketches from William and Harry, and even a diary. Lady Sarah was not given power over everything. The will had limitations, and much of it was straightforward. But for the portions that dealt with the next generation, Diana's grandchildren, Sarah was given leeway. She could decide when and how certain heirlooms or funds were released. And most notably, she could delay, deny, or reassign those assets if she believed Diana's original intentions were at risk of being misunderstood or misused. At the time of Diana's death, such a clause may have seemed overly cautious. William and Harry were still boys, still very much in the embrace of the royal fold. But over the years, as the family evolved, and particularly as Harry's path began to diverge, that clause began to take on new meaning. Lady Sarah rarely speaks publicly. Unlike her brother Charles Spencer, who has written memoirs and occasionally steps into the public eye, Sarah remains reclusive. She has no social media presence, avoids interviews, and has never sought to profit from her sister's legacy. In fact, those who know her describe her as fiercely private and deeply loyal, to Diana, above all. But in recent years, Sarah has reportedly grown increasingly uncomfortable with how Diana's name has been invoked in the media, particularly by Meghan and Harry. Sources close to the McCorquodale family say that Sarah kept a close eye on interviews, book releases, podcasts, and press releases that mentioned Diana. She was especially disturbed by the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan, where Diana was repeatedly referenced as the spiritual blueprint for the couple's activism. To Sarah, it felt as though Diana's legacy was being rebranded, not remembered. And then there was Archie. Born in May 2019, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor entered the world already surrounded by conflict. A royal baby born into a family on the verge of fracture. His birth should have been a celebration of unity, a continuation of Diana's line. But within months, the tension between Meghan and the rest of the royal family erupted into the public eye. Accusations of racism, abandonment, and betrayal flew from every direction. Behind the scenes, Lady Sarah grew concerned. Not about Archie personally. By all accounts, she holds no ill will toward the child, but about what he represented. The transformation of Diana's memory into a platform, a brand, a banner waved in a transatlantic war of narratives. In this context, Sarah began to review her role in Diana's estate. The clause once seen as ceremonial now demanded her attention. And after careful legal consultation and what sources say were lengthy private deliberations, she made the decision. She would not permit Archie access to certain items and funds from Diana's trust, not out of malice, but out of what she described in internal communications as a moral obligation to safeguard the legacy of my sister, Lady Diana, from becoming a commercialized or politicized tool. It was a decision that stunned even those closest to her. But Lady Sarah, true to form, did not waver. In doing so, she reopened old wounds and started a new battle. What makes this development so dramatic is that, for many, Diana was seen as a kind of protective spirit around Meghan. Fans of the Duchess of Sussex often point out the similarities in their treatment by the media, their charitable focus, and their emotional vulnerability. Some have even gone as far as to say that Meghan is fulfilling Diana's destiny in a way the royal family never allowed her to. But not everyone agrees. To Lady Sarah, this resemblance is superficial at best and dangerous at worst. For years, Sarah held her silence, choosing to support her sister's memory through charity work and personal discretion. But now, as Meghan's voice grows louder in the global arena, Sarah has chosen to make a statement, not through the press, but through the one power she still holds: Diana's estate. In the royal world, inheritance is about more than money. It is about connection, bloodlines, symbolism, and perhaps most importantly, it is about legitimacy. By denying Archie access to a portion of Diana's legacy, Lady Sarah has effectively drawn a line in the sand. She is saying that legacy must be earned, not inherited by default. Whether or not the public will agree with her remains to be seen. What is certain, however, is that Diana's legacy is no longer a silent artifact in a sealed vault. It is alive, and it is being contested. As this story continues to unfold, the true battle may not be between Lady Sarah and Meghan Markle, but between two competing visions of Diana's legacy. One rooted in memory, guarded by blood. The other broadcast in soundbites, tweets, and Netflix episodes. And somewhere in the middle lies a child named Archie, caught between the past he never knew and the future he may never fully claim. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle made their decision to step back from royal duties in January 2020, the announcement felt like a detonation heard around the world. To many, it was a modern couple choosing independence over duty, privacy over palace protocol. But behind the headlines and rehearsed press releases was a fracture years in the making. And at its heart was something deeper than independence: resentment, disillusionment, and the belief that they were never truly protected. Meghan Markle's arrival into the royal family was heralded by a media frenzy unseen since the days of Princess Diana. A biracial American actress marrying into one of the most tradition-bound institutions on earth was, on the surface, a symbol of progress. For a time, the press spun a fairy tale: glowing features, breathless coverage of the wedding, speculation over what changes Meghan might bring to the monarchy. But the fairy tale quickly curdled into criticism. From the scrutiny over her fashion choices to feuds, real or imagined, with her sister-in-law Kate Middleton, to her family's embarrassing tabloid spectacles, Meghan was relentlessly targeted. Headlines compared her to Kate in ways that always found Meghan lacking. The coverage was unforgiving, often cruel, and occasionally veiled in racial undertones. Prince Harry, having lost his mother to the same relentless glare of flashbulbs and headlines, watched with growing horror. His new wife, like Diana, was drowning in public dissection, and no one in the institution, he felt, was stepping in to help. The final straw, they would later claim, came when Meghan became pregnant with Archie and still found no protection or sympathy from palace officials. Private pleas for fair treatment were ignored. Meetings with aides yielded little. Instead of support, there was silence. And in that silence, they heard the echo of Diana's story repeating. What followed was a slow and then sudden unraveling. A private struggle turned public. The couple announced their departure from senior royal roles on Instagram, reportedly blindsiding even the Queen. The Sussexes proposed a hybrid model: part-time royals who would still serve the crown but also pursue their own commercial ventures. Buckingham Palace rejected the idea. A summit at Sandringham involving Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry cemented the exit. They would no longer be working royals. They would lose their HRH titles. They would repay the money used to renovate Frogmore Cottage. And they would relocate, eventually settling in California. The announcement marked the end of an era and the beginning of what tabloids would dub Megxit. But beneath the branding and outrage was something far more personal. Harry and Meghan no longer believed in the institution Diana had once tried to survive. To the outside world, it appeared like a self-liberation. But to the royal family, especially those tied closely to Diana's memory, it felt like an abandonment, not just of duty, but of legacy. Lady Sarah, Diana's sister, had watched these events unfold with quiet discomfort. While the royal family scrambled to control the narrative and limit the damage, Sarah's concerns were more personal. She wasn't worried about the monarchy's survival. She was worried about Diana's story being rewritten. The Netflix deals, the podcasts, the docuseries, the memoir. Each move made by Harry and Meghan was interpreted by some, including Sarah, as a subtle co-opting of Diana's legacy. Images of Diana were used to illustrate Meghan's suffering. Quotes from Diana were repurposed to support their new ventures. Even the music used in their interviews was In interviews, Harry began speaking about his mother with renewed intensity. He described how she would be furious at how they were treated, how he felt her guiding presence. Meghan described watching old footage of Diana and feeling a connection, an invisible thread linking their pain. To their fans, these comparisons were poignant. To Lady Sarah, they were troubling. Sources close to her say she felt Diana's life was being used to justify choices she may not have agreed with. Sarah believed Diana would have supported her children unconditionally, but also that she would have been cautious, especially when it came to how her name and image were used in media. Meghan's role in this transformation cannot be overstated. To many, she is a victim of archaic traditions, a modern woman crushed under the weight of an outdated institution. To others, she is a savvy manipulator who entered royalty with an agenda. The truth is likely more complex. Meghan was an outsider, and the palace was a world built on insider codes. The culture shock was enormous. The isolation, real. The rules, inflexible. As she struggled to find her footing, Meghan found solace in crafting her own narrative. Interviews, partnerships, and creative control became her tools. But the more she spoke, the more it seemed Diana's ghost was being invoked, not only as a source of pain but as a means of validation. This was particularly evident during the now infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey. Meghan wore a black Armani dress adorned with a lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth, just like Diana wore black in her own defining interview with Martin Bashir. During the sit-down, Meghan and Harry alleged that members of the royal family expressed concerns over Archie's skin tone, and that Meghan had been denied mental health support when she felt suicidal. The world responded with shock and division. But among those most affected was Lady Sarah. For years, Sarah had protected Diana's legacy with silence. She had turned down book deals, ignored interview requests, and refrained from capitalizing on her sister's name. She believed the best way to honor Diana was not to speak for her, but to preserve the truth of who she was. Now, as Meghan and Harry told their story with Diana as their spiritual ally, Sarah began to fear that silence was no longer enough. By the time their Netflix docuseries was released, showcasing archival footage of Diana alongside clips of Meghan crying, Sarah was already in conversation with lawyers. She revisited Diana's will. She read the clause she had once seen as symbolic and understood it now as directive. She had been entrusted with the responsibility of protecting Diana's legacy for the next generation. That included Diana's grandchildren, but not unconditionally. It was during this period that Meghan made what sources now describe as a fatal misstep. During a private roundtable recording for an unreleased podcast, Meghan reportedly made a comment that struck a nerve. Speaking off-camera to a producer, she said, "I'm not going to raise Archie in a system that silenced Diana and buried her truth. He deserves to inherit her strength, not her shackles." The comment was never aired, but someone in the room remembered it, and eventually it reached Lady Sarah. To Sarah, the comment wasn't just a critique of the monarchy. It was a direct implication that Diana had been passive, defeated, even weak, that her death was something to overcome, not something to honor. Sarah, who had seen Diana fight with every ounce of her will to protect her boys, felt a shift. This wasn't just a rebranding. This was a reimagining of Diana as a tragic warning, not a loving guide. And so, the wheels were set in motion. Harry's role in all of this is equally layered. To the world, he is a son seeking justice. To his family, he is a prince unraveling the very fabric of royal continuity. To Lady Sarah, he is the boy Diana adored, the same boy who once held her hand at their mother's funeral, now a man torn between love and duty. Sarah reportedly tried to reach out to Harry privately before making her decision. Whether the call was received, ignored, or rejected is unclear. What is known is that shortly afterward, Sarah finalized the legal paperwork to revoke certain inheritance rights from Archie, particularly those involving items from Diana's personal collection and discretionary funds. When Meghan found out, her fury was immediate. But Harry? He was devastated. For Harry, losing access to Diana's heirlooms for his son wasn't just a legal setback, it was a spiritual wound. A painful reminder that even now, with all his efforts to protect his mother's legacy, he was still being outmaneuvered by the ghosts of the past. Some say this moment marked a turning point in Harry's relationship with his extended family. Not because of the inheritance itself, but because of what it represented. A rejection. A verdict. That despite all his public devotion to Diana's memory, her own sister believed he had strayed too far from her truth. And so, as Harry and Meghan continued their path in America, launching foundations, giving speeches, raising children, they did so under a shadow. Not cast by the crown, but by a woman who knew Diana before the world did. A woman who now stood between them and the legacy they believed was theirs. When Princess Diana passed away in 1997, the media frenzy surrounding her tragic death nearly drowned out the quieter, more meticulous matters taking place behind the scenes, legal matters. Primarily the execution of her last will and testament. While the world wept and newspapers ran 24-hour coverage. Diana's legal team was already working behind locked doors to ensure her final wishes were carried out exactly as she had outlined in the carefully crafted document she had revised just months prior to her untimely death. Her will, dated June 1, 1993, and later amended with a codicil in 1996 following her divorce from Prince Charles, outlined not only who would receive what, but why. Unlike many royal wills, which are kept entirely secret, Diana's was at least partially made public, and some of its contents eventually emerged through news leaks and court records. The most public aspects centered around the money, her sizable estate, primarily accumulated through her divorce settlement, inheritance from her father's side, jewelry, and trust funds for Prince William and Prince Harry. But there was one provision that few paid much attention to, a clause that seemed, at the time, like a footnote, a discretionary power given to her elder sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale. This clause would later become the epicenter of a royal earthquake. The clause allowed Lady Sarah to have oversight over certain heirlooms and trust distributions designated for the benefit of future descendants. While Diana explicitly left the majority of her estate to her sons, she anticipated the day when her grandchildren would also benefit from her legacy. And rather than entrust this decision-making to the institution, to the monarchy, or even to her own children, who were still quite young, she placed that power in the hands of someone she trusted implicitly, her sister. To understand why she made that decision, one has to understand the unique relationship between Diana and Sarah. Lady Sarah was not just Diana's older sister. She was also her confidant, her unofficial advisor, and at times, her fiercest protector. Throughout the ups and downs of Diana's marriage to Prince Charles, through the scandals and separations, Sarah remained one of the only people Diana trusted unconditionally. During the last few months of her life, as Diana distanced herself from royal protocol and publicly defined herself outside the shadow of the monarchy, it was Sarah who she consulted with about what her legacy should look like. She didn't want everything she had built to be swallowed by the palace or repurposed by handlers. She wanted control, posthumously, and Sarah was the one person she felt could preserve that control. According to private notes discovered years later, Diana once wrote to Sarah, "If anything ever happens to me, I need to know that someone with a heart will protect what matters. Not just the boys, but the meaning behind it all." So when Diana included a discretionary clause in her will, giving Sarah the legal right to determine the release of certain assets to grandchildren, it was not just a formality, it was a coded message. A safeguard against potential misuse of her memory, an insurance policy for her values. For years, this clause went unchallenged, unnoticed even. William and Harry came of age, received their inheritances, and used them responsibly. The jewelry was divided, William choosing the engagement ring, Harry the Cartier watch and other sentimental items. The vault of letters and personal belongings remained under family control, untouched by outsiders. Diana's legacy appeared safe. That illusion was shattered in recent months. As Meghan Markle and Prince Harry began invoking Diana's name in nearly every public endeavor, Lady Sarah grew concerned. She had been watching, quietly at first, as the couple leaned heavily on the emotional currency of Diana's legacy. In interviews, documentaries, and book deals, they spoke of Diana not just as a beloved mother, but as a spiritual predecessor to Meghan, a woman crushed by the institution who found her voice too late. Sarah reportedly believed this narrative was too simplistic, that Diana's struggles were real, yes, but so were her ties to the royal family. She feared that her sister's story was being weaponized for personal gain. And when it became clear that Archie Harrison was being placed symbolically at the center of that story, she felt compelled to act. It began with an audit. Lady Sarah requested a formal review of the discretionary elements of the trust tied to Diana's estate. While the bulk of the estate had already been dispersed to William and Harry, portions remained sealed for future heirs: jewelry, letters, art, family heirlooms, and in some cases, cash assets held in family trust with scheduled release dates. These assets were meant to be shared among Diana's grandchildren, including Archie and Lilibet, but they were subject to the discretionary clause that Sarah controlled. She could delay, deny, or reassign these assets if she believed that distributing them would go against the intentions Diana had expressed to her in life. Sarah's review of the estate wasn't just financial, it was moral. She examined public statements, interviews, behaviors. She watched the Netflix series, read transcripts from the Oprah interview, reviewed Meghan's podcast episodes. She met with Diana's former private secretary. She read Meghan's speech at the UN. All of it, every public association made with Diana's name, became part of the evaluation. Her conclusion was clear. Granting Archie automatic access to these specific elements of Diana's estate risked turning Diana's legacy into a political and commercial tool. That was the justification. And under the clause Diana had written, it was all she needed. She executed the legal paperwork in a private hearing. The decision did not affect any of the assets already in Harry's possession. It did not touch William's inheritance, but it did alter the scheduled transfer of certain heirlooms and trust-based items to Archie. Among them, a handwritten letter from Diana to her future grandchildren, a bracelet she wore during her final charity trip, a series of private photographs, never released to the public, showing Diana with the boys in private moments, photos intended for the eyes of her grandchildren one day. And most significantly, a cash inheritance of approximately £5 million held in a protective trust intended for the grandchildren's educational and philanthropic efforts. That money, under Sarah's discretion, was reallocated. Not to the monarchy, not to herself, but to a revised trust structure benefiting William's children and to charities Diana supported, particularly those focused on landmine survivors and AIDS orphans, causes she championed in her final years. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a statement. Lady Sarah did not issue a public press release. She didn't give an interview or hold a conference. But the message was unmistakable. She was drawing a line between Diana's legacy and the Sussex brand. When the paperwork was served to Harry and Meghan's legal team in California, the reaction was immediate. Meghan, according to palace insiders and sources close to the couple, was livid. She believed the inheritance was a matter of birthright, that as Diana's grandson, Archie should be entitled to the same treatment as William's children. She reportedly called it a betrayal of Diana's own blood. But the clause in the will said otherwise. And the power lay not with Harry or even with Charles, but with Sarah, a woman who had stood beside Diana in life and now stood between her memory and those who sought to reshape it. Legal experts have since weighed in, analyzing the unusual authority granted by the clause. Some have called it extraordinary, a rare case of personal discretion overtaking familial entitlement. Others believe it's a landmark moment in estate law, a moment where intention finally eclipsed inheritance. But beyond the legal implications lies something deeper, an emotional rift, a symbolic fracture. To Meghan and Harry, the decision felt like a slap. To Lady Sarah, it was a promise kept. To the public, it was yet another reminder that Diana's death did not end her influence. It simply delayed her final word. In Meghan Markle's world, the birth of her son Archie Harrison was supposed to signify something sacred, a restoration of balance, a merging of worlds, and the continuation of a royal bloodline through a new, modern lens. From the moment she and Prince Harry welcomed Archie into the world in May 2019, Meghan held tightly to the belief that her child, like Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, would be embraced by royal tradition and, more importantly, share in the legacy of Princess Diana. But legacy, as it turned out, would not be handed down without conditions. When Meghan first entered the royal family, she came equipped with everything a modern duchess could need: style, intellect, a strong public speaking voice, and a global audience. What she lacked, however, was generational history within the monarchy. Unlike Kate Middleton, who had been slowly absorbed into royal protocol over years of quiet preparation and exposure to palace life, Meghan came in as a high-speed disruptor. Fast, passionate, and unwilling to play by rules she had never been taught to revere. From the start, she was treated differently, and she knew it. She may not have anticipated the extent of media cruelty she would endure, nor the quiet distance that would emerge between herself and the royal family. But she did anticipate one thing, that by marrying Prince Harry, the younger son of Princess Diana, she was entering a sacred trust, one that would extend to their children. She imagined Diana's legacy would protect Archie, that the people who had failed Diana in life would not dare fail her grandson in death. But Meghan underestimated just how complex that legacy truly was. After the Netflix docuseries and the release of Harry's memoir, Spare, Meghan believed she and Harry had finally reclaimed the narrative. They had poured their truth into every available outlet. They had shifted public perception and gained a new following, people who believed that the institution of monarchy was outdated, that Harry and Meghan had been mistreated, and that Diana would have supported their exit from royal life. In interviews, Meghan carefully referenced Diana in tones both reverent and maternal. She called her an inspiration, a guiding light, and in private, referred to herself as the daughter Diana never had. Her fans repeated those sentiments with fervor, often drawing comparisons between the two women, their struggles, and their strength. Meghan's assumption, quiet, internal, but fiercely held, was that because Diana had suffered, she would have stood behind the Sussex family, especially Archie. And in Meghan's view, that made her son more than just a royal baby. It made him an heir to a spiritual inheritance, one deeper than crowns or castles. He was the grandson of Diana. And that, to Meghan, meant he was entitled to everything that came with it. So when the letter arrived informing them that certain heirlooms and assets from Diana's estate would not be passed on to Archie, Meghan was convinced it had to be a mistake. The letter, sent by Lady Sarah McCorquodale's legal representative, was written in precise legal language. It referenced the discretionary clause in Diana's will. It outlined specific items being withheld from transfer. And it stated, unequivocally, that the decision had been made in alignment with Diana's original values and intention. Meghan stared at the letter for what felt like an hour. The atmosphere in the Montecito mansion that day reportedly shifted. According to two staff members who were in the house, Meghan's reaction was immediate and explosive. She demanded answers, called her attorney, and refused to believe that Lady Sarah had the legal authority to make such a decision. "This is theft," she allegedly said. "She's stealing from Archie." Harry, ever the mediator, tried to calm the situation. He suggested calling Lady Sarah directly. Meghan refused. "She's made up her mind. She thinks I'm not worthy," she reportedly said. "She thinks Archie isn't Diana's grandson just because I'm not royal enough." What stung Meghan the most wasn't the loss of money or items, it was the implication behind the decision. The silent judgment. The message that Diana's own sister did not see Meghan or her child as legitimate heirs to the memory of the woman they had both spoken so lovingly about in public. Later that day, Meghan instructed her team to set up an emergency consultation with her legal advisors. Over Zoom, her lawyers confirmed the harsh truth. The clause in Diana's will was real. It gave Lady Sarah discretion, and the courts would likely uphold it. Meghan went quiet. Then she got angry. She walked into her home office, where a crystal vase, reportedly a wedding gift from a South African ambassador, sat atop a marble-topped console. Without a word, she picked it up and flung it across the room. It shattered against the stone fireplace, pieces of glass scattering across the floor. Staff were told to leave the house for the rest of the day. Later that evening, Harry and Meghan sat in the garden, away from the children. Harry, his face pale and drawn, listened as Meghan cried. But he didn't cry with her. He had a look, according to a friend who later spoke with him, of someone who had just been publicly disowned, again, not by the institution, but by the people he thought still held a piece of his mother's heart. In the days that followed, Meghan's fury became strategic. She began drafting ideas for a response, not a legal one, but a narrative one. Her public relations team floated the idea of a new interview. Not another Oprah sit-down, but something with a younger, more progressive outlet. The goal would be to subtly reveal the injustice she felt had been done, without directly naming Lady Sarah, but making the public understand what had been taken. But Harry reportedly pushed back. "She's not the enemy," he told Meghan. "Then why is she treating our son like one?" Meghan snapped. The tension between Harry and Meghan in that period was quiet, but present. Harry was mourning something different than Meghan. He wasn't just angry, he was ashamed. Ashamed that his own family, fractured as they were, could not come together even in his mother's name. Ashamed that the legacy he had tried so hard to protect was now being used to measure the worth of his child. For Meghan, the stakes were different. She felt judged, excluded, and betrayed. She believed that no matter what she did, she would never be enough, not for the family, not for the monarchy, not even for the memory of a woman she had never met but had always revered. She made calls to mutual friends of Diana, hoping someone could offer support. Some responded with sympathy. Others were more guarded. One friend, a former confidant of Diana's from her charity days, told Meghan something that stayed with her. Diana loved fiercely, the woman said, but she also feared what fame could do to people. She gave everything to protect her boys. Maybe Sarah feels she has to protect Diana now. Meghan reportedly ended the call in silence. She began reevaluating her approach. If she couldn't challenge Lady Sarah in court, perhaps she could reframe the conversation in the court of public opinion. She instructed her team to begin compiling footage, quotes, and behind-the-scenes moments from her time as a royal, anything that showed how she had honored Diana, not exploited her. A folder labeled Legacy Package was created. Inside it were clips from speeches, charity visits, and interviews where Meghan spoke lovingly of Diana. The intention was clear. Meghan wanted the world to see that her admiration for Diana was real, not strategic. That she had carried Diana's torch with grace, not greed. But behind all of this effort was a deeper emotional truth, one Meghan couldn't package or publish. The truth that for all her global influence, media savvy, and social following, she still couldn't change one thing. Diana's family didn't believe Archie was worthy of the inheritance she had left behind. The pain of that realization would shape every decision Meghan made moving forward. It would fuel new interviews, color her public appearances, and affect her next moves as a mother, a wife, and a figure caught between history and modernity. Because while money can be replaced and jewelry can be replicated, trust cannot. And for Meghan, that was the true inheritance stolen. Long before legal documents were reviewed, before trust clauses were enforced or lawyers got involved, a single letter sat sealed in an oak box inside Lady Sarah McCorquodale's study at her private estate in Lincolnshire. It was a letter written by Diana, months before her tragic death, marked only with the word "for Sarah" in Diana's familiar handwriting. That letter would come to define the most controversial inheritance decision in recent royal history. Lady Sarah had held onto the letter with a kind of reverence that only comes when grief is still active, when memory still tastes fresh in the mouth and colors the way one moves through the world. She did not often open the box. For over 20 years, the letter remained untouched, read only once, stored away like a sacred text no one was meant to touch. It was personal, private. A final whisper from a sister who had spent her life under public lights and died in them too. But as the rift between Meghan and the royal family widened, and as Diana's name became more frequently attached to political and media narratives, Lady Sarah felt a shift. Something deep inside her began to stir. It was not bitterness. It was not jealousy. It was a rising instinct, the same one Diana had once described in the letter itself, the need to protect. When Meghan and Harry's Netflix series was released and began drawing overt parallels between Meghan's experience and Diana's tragedy, Sarah quietly opened the oak box and reread the letter for the first time in over 2 decades. And what she found inside confirmed everything she had been feeling. The letter, though never made public in full, has now been quoted and paraphrased in legal summaries and family conversations. It was dated March 1997, 5 months before Diana's death, and written during a period of profound transition. She had already finalized her divorce from Prince Charles. She had cut ties with many former royal duties and was building a new life with causes she cared about deeply: landmine awareness, AIDS charities, and youth organizations. But even as she stepped into independence, Diana remained fixated on her sons. Her greatest fear was not personal loneliness or public criticism. It was the fear that her children would be raised within the same machine that had nearly destroyed her. In the letter to Sarah, Diana wrote about legacy, not in terms of money or objects, but in terms of meaning. She expressed hope that her future grandchildren would grow up with compassion, humility, and an understanding of true service. She worried that the glamour surrounding her name might one day be misused or repurposed in ways she would never have agreed with. "I do not want my legacy to be filtered through celebrity," the letter read. "I want it to be filtered through kindness, empathy, and action. If I am not here to see my grandchildren, I ask you, Sarah, to protect what I cannot." Diana went on to discuss specific heirlooms. Some she described as deeply personal: photographs, handwritten journals, and charity memorabilia that she hoped would be passed on only when her grandchildren had matured enough to understand their value. She emphasized that these items were not to be handed over based on titles or blood alone. Instead, she insisted that they be given when and if her sister believed the recipient embodied the values she had lived by. The legal weight of this letter, when paired with the discretionary clause in Diana's will, formed the bedrock of Lady Sarah's controversial decision to withhold Archie Harrison's inheritance. For Lady Sarah, this was not a political statement, nor was it a personal attack on Meghan or Harry. It was a faithful execution of her sister's final request, a moral responsibility to act as Diana's voice when Diana no longer could. The decision did not come easily. In private, Sarah reportedly agonized over the consequences. She knew the backlash would be immense. She knew it would fuel already flaring tensions between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. But the letter sat in her hands as a reminder of what was at stake, not just money or mementos, but the soul of a legacy. After rereading the letter and consulting with Diana's former private secretary, who confirmed Diana's intentions at the time, Lady Sarah moved forward. She made copies of the letter and included excerpts in a private memo to be filed alongside the trust documents. She kept the original sealed, but the content, now re-entering the lives of those affected by Diana's estate, changed everything. Meghan and Harry were not given a copy of the letter at first. Instead, they received a summarized legal statement confirming the existence of the letter and its significance in shaping Sarah's decisions. Meghan was reportedly stunned that such a document existed and that it had never been discussed before. In response, Meghan allegedly asked why Diana's own son, Harry, had never seen it. The answer was painful. Diana had chosen not to share the letter with her children, at least not directly. It was addressed to Sarah and entrusted to her, along with the authority to act on its contents when the time was right. Meghan was said to have been infuriated. She reportedly told a friend, "So we're being judged by a ghost? By a letter written before I even existed in Harry's life." It wasn't just the letter's contents that upset her, it was its timing. The fact that it had remained hidden, only to resurface now, gave her the sense that she and her children were being measured against impossible standards. But for Lady Sarah, the standards were never impossible. They were just deeply personal. They were the standards of a sister who had watched Diana cry through press smears, beg for protection from an unfeeling system, and ultimately die while trying to forge her own path. Sarah saw in Meghan and Harry's recent behavior, however well-intentioned, a level of exposure and commercialization that Diana would have loathed. One of the most poignant lines in the letter read, "I know the world will try to take pieces of me and sell them, but you, Sarah, must protect what is real." To Sarah, what is real meant more than jewels or photographs. It meant integrity. It meant resisting the urge to turn grief into a brand. It meant keeping Diana's memory human, not iconic. The implications of the letter continue to ripple. Royal historians have begun debating whether Diana's wishes were overinterpreted or appropriately respected. Some argue that the letter offers vital insight into Diana's evolving worldview, while others claim it creates unnecessary division in an already fractured family. One royal biographer, who has spent decades researching Diana's life, suggested that the letter added complexity to her legacy. Diana wasn't a saint, he said. She was a complicated, brilliant, wounded woman. This letter shows she was thinking ahead, not just about her children, but about the kind of world they would raise their children in. For Harry, the letter's revelation was crushing. Sources say he spent days reflecting on its contents. He reportedly told a close friend, "If Mum really felt that way, I wish she had told me." It wasn't a rejection, but it felt like a warning, a message that he had perhaps misunderstood some part of her vision. It left him questioning whether his efforts to honor Diana had inadvertently betrayed her deeper hopes. The tension between honoring memory and forging new identity is not unique to Harry and Meghan. It's a theme that haunts many modern families, especially those with legacies as publicly dissected as the Windsors. But in this case, the stakes are generational. Archie is more than a child. He is a living symbol of two competing visions of Diana's future, one rooted in reform and compassion, the other grounded in privacy and discretion. The existence of Diana's letter changes everything. It repositions Lady Sarah not as a villain, but as an executor of a deeply emotional trust. It casts Diana not just as a tragic figure, but as a woman who saw the future clearly and made plans accordingly. And it puts Meghan in the uncomfortable position of being someone whose public embrace of Diana's image may now appear, at least to Diana's family, as misaligned with the real woman they knew. The letter will likely never be released in full to the public. It remains in Sarah's possession, guarded, preserved, and respected. But its influence has already reshaped the inheritance landscape for Diana's descendants. It has rewritten the narrative and reminded the world that legacies are not just about money, names, or titles. They are about intention. And Diana's intentions, though written in ink decades ago, have just changed everything. The moment news broke that Lady Sarah McCorquodale had exercised her discretionary power to withhold specific elements of Princess Diana's estate from Archie Harrison, the reaction from royal commentators, media outlets, and social platforms was immediate, polarized, and deafening. The decision triggered a storm of debates across continents. Was this an act of principled protection, staying loyal to Diana's wishes? Or was it a calculated punishment? A form of revenge aimed at Meghan Markle through the most vulnerable target, her child? The public response was predictably divided. On one side were the staunch defenders of tradition, who praised Lady Sarah for having the courage to act where the monarchy had remained passive. On the other were critics who saw the move as an unforgivable betrayal, one that reeked of pettiness and outdated hierarchy. The royal family itself remained officially silent. Buckingham Palace declined to comment, citing the matter as a private family issue. But silence did not equate to neutrality. Behind closed doors, insiders say the decision drew subtle nods of approval from some senior royals, especially those who felt that Meghan and Harry's continued use of Diana's image in commercial media ventures bordered on exploitation. Royal correspondent Judith Allen, a veteran journalist with over 3 decades covering the British monarchy, was one of the first to break ranks and publicly defend Lady Sarah. "This is not about cruelty," Allen wrote in her column. "It's about control." For years, the royal family has struggled to respond to the Sussexes' version of events without appearing vindictive. Lady Sarah, acting outside of the Crown's direct influence, has done something they couldn't: draw a line. And she's done it in the name of the one person everyone claims to represent, Diana. That view is echoed by other long-standing royal commentators. Some saw it as a turning point, a moment when those who knew Diana personally finally pushed back against the media narrative that had transformed her into a symbol stripped of nuance. In a televised roundtable hosted by Britain's Channel 4, royal historians debated the implications of the move. Dr. Malcolm Crowther, a professor of modern monarchy studies at Oxford, argued that Lady Sarah had acted with integrity. "Diana was not a myth," he said. "She was a woman with values, principles, and a very specific vision for her family. Lady Sarah is the last person alive who truly shared that inner vision. If she believes those values are being distorted or repackaged for American audiences, it is not only her right but her duty to act." Not everyone agreed. On the other side of the spectrum, British-American journalist Caitlin Parks took a vastly different stance in her piece for The Independent. "This decision reeks of gatekeeping," Parks wrote. "Meghan Markle has done nothing but honor Diana in every public space she occupies. To suggest that her son is somehow unworthy of inheriting Diana's belongings or message is to engage in the very exclusion that Diana herself spent a lifetime resisting." The issue, Parks argued, was not whether Diana would have approved of Meghan and Harry's choices, but whether her memory was being monopolized by those who refused to accept change. "This is about power," she said. "The old guard clinging to their version of Diana and punishing anyone who doesn't fit that mold." Social media was a battlefield. Twitter erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForArchie and #Diana'sWill. Royal watchers and celebrity influencers alike weighed in. Some called it karma, others labeled it cruelty. Memes circulated showing Diana frowning from heaven as Meghan wept. In contrast, others posted quotes from Diana's speeches, arguing she would have embraced Meghan as a fellow outsider in the royal world. The debate extended to morning shows and primetime panels. In the U.S., hosts on networks like CNN and NBC emphasized the racial and cultural undertones of the decision. Commentators questioned whether this would have happened had Archie been born to a white royal mother. They accused the family of perpetuating the very structures of exclusion Diana had tried to escape. In the UK, the tone was more restrained, yet equally fierce. Piers Morgan, no stranger to controversy, claimed the move was overdue. "It's about time someone stood up for Diana's real legacy," he said on air. "Enough with the victim narratives. Diana wasn't a pawn. She was a powerhouse. She wouldn't have supported the way her name has been used like a trademark." Others weren't so sure. Lorraine Hamilton, a royal biographer, said she felt torn by the decision. "Diana was full of contradictions," she said. "She wanted to shield her children from the system, but she also believed in family. She rebelled, but she loved fiercely. If she had lived, who knows how she would have responded to Harry's choices. But punishing Archie, that feels like punishing a child for choices he didn't make." The heart of the debate centered around a few uncomfortable questions. Can legacy be conditional? Can a deceased person's wishes override the evolving values of a family? And does the symbolism of inheritance carry more weight than the items themselves? Lady Sarah, for her part, offered no public interviews, but a close family friend anonymously provided insight into her mindset. "Sarah loved Diana more than anyone," the friend said. "She watched what that life did to her. She supported her through divorces, scandals, and isolation. When Diana wrote that letter asking her to safeguard her legacy, Sarah took it as a sacred vow. She's not acting out of malice. She's acting out of memory." Still, critics continued to push back. Activist and author Amina Clark wrote an op-ed in The Guardian titled, "Archie Deserves Better." In it, she wrote, "This decision may be dressed in the language of legacy, but it reeks of the same aristocratic rigidity that pushed Diana to the edge. To deny a child access to his grandmother's gifts based on unmeasurable values is cruel, not principled." The debate also exposed the growing generational and cultural divide within the royal sphere. Older royalists viewed Lady Sarah's actions as a necessary boundary, a way to keep Diana's story from becoming a commercial enterprise. Younger generations, particularly in the United States, saw it as a moral failure. Proof that the family was incapable of adapting to a new world where transparency and storytelling reigned supreme. One striking moment came during a panel discussion on Sky News when a caller from Manchester, a 28-year-old woman named Nina, said, "If Diana fought to give her sons freedom, why are we punishing one of her grandkids for what his parents did with that freedom?" The room went quiet. Because that was the crux of the issue. Was Archie being punished? Or was Diana's memory being protected? Even within the royal family, whispers of division grew louder. Aides close to Prince William reportedly expressed quiet approval of Lady Sarah's decision, seeing it as a reinforcement of traditional values. But others hinted that Charles, now king, was uncomfortable with the public fallout and privately wished the matter had been handled differently. The situation placed Harry in an impossible position. To defend his wife and child meant questioning his aunt's fidelity to his mother. To remain silent meant accepting that his child had been judged unworthy by his own blood. He was trapped between past and present, loyalty and progress. In private, Harry reportedly struggled with the weight of it all. Friends say he vacillated between anger and sorrow, telling one confidant, "They say they're protecting her, but they're rewriting her. She would have loved Archie. That should have been enough." As weeks passed and media coverage intensified, a few unexpected voices entered the conversation. Two former friends of Diana, who had remained silent for decades, came forward to offer their own perspectives. One, a former nurse who worked with Diana on her early HIV campaigns, said, "She always feared that people would turn her name into a brand. But she also believed in redemption, in giving people a chance to prove themselves. I think she would have watched Meghan closely, but I don't think she'd shut the door on Archie." Another, a close friend from her days at Kensington Palace, took a firmer stance. Diana would have supported Sarah. She always said, "if anything happens." The divide, both public and private, now runs deep. In the end, the decision by Lady Sarah may never find universal approval. It may always remain a controversial footnote in the long and winding saga of the House of Windsor. But it has done one thing undeniably: it has forced a global audience to re-examine what legacy really means. Is it a collection of items passed down without thought? Or is it a living set of values, defended even at the cost of familial comfort? Diana's voice, even in silence, continues to shape the world she left behind. Through her words, her fears, and her love, she cast a long shadow over a future she tried desperately to influence. And now, through Lady Sarah, she speaks again, not in interviews, not on television, but through a decision that reignited the age-old question: is honoring the dead about preserving the past, or challenging the present? If there's one thing the modern royal family has learned in the digital age, it's that no decision, no matter how personal or private, remains behind closed doors for long. The moment the news broke that Lady Sarah McCorquodale had officially moved to withhold specific elements of Princess Diana's estate from Archie Harrison, social media lit up like a fuse touching gunpowder. What had begun as a private estate decision among blood relatives rapidly exploded into a global culture war fueled by hashtags, influencers, royal fans, and online activism. Within hours of the story surfacing, #JusticeForArchie trended worldwide on Twitter. Instagram accounts dedicated to the Sussexes flooded timelines with edited images of Diana cradling Harry as a child, paired with captions accusing her family of betraying her true legacy. TikTok creators uploaded split-screen videos juxtaposing Meghan's speeches about motherhood with grainy footage of Diana's humanitarian work, drawing parallels between two women seen by their fans as symbols of compassion crushed by an outdated institution. But it wasn't just fan accounts adding fuel to the fire. Verified celebrities joined the discourse. One American actress tweeted, "Imagine denying a child access to his grandmother's memory because you don't like his mother. Shameful." A British author responded with, "No one is entitled to a legacy they exploit. Diana deserves protection, not rebranding." The story took on a life of its own. It became more than just inheritance. It became a symbol of generational conflict, cultural misunderstanding, and identity. For many, particularly younger, more progressive audiences, Archie's exclusion from certain pieces of Diana's estate wasn't just a legal decision, it was a metaphor for systemic rejection. On Reddit, threads emerged comparing Lady Sarah's decision to broader conversations around race and acceptance in the royal family. This wouldn't have happened if Archie had been William's son, one user wrote, igniting a fierce back and forth that gained thousands of upvotes. It's the same system that protected Andrew but punished Meghan, another added. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, morning talk shows weighed in with open emotion. The View dedicated a segment to the controversy, where hosts debated whether Diana's family had crossed a moral line. One host said bluntly, "You don't punish children. Period. Whatever you feel about Meghan, Archie is Diana's grandson. This shouldn't even be a discussion." But in the UK, the response was more fragmented. On one hand, tabloid headlines read like war drums. Lady Sarah defends Diana's dignity. Archie cut off. Was Meghan to blame? And legacy or vendetta? On the other hand, opinion columns in more measured publications urged empathy for both sides. One columnist in The Telegraph argued that the outrage was misplaced. This wasn't a spiteful act. It was a decision made based on values Diana held closely. Lady Sarah is not punishing a child. She's defending a legacy. Still, the emotional current behind the online reaction couldn't be dismissed. The anger wasn't purely about the inheritance itself. It was about what it represented. To Meghan's supporters, this was yet another confirmation that no matter what she did, she would never be accepted by the institution, and by extension, neither would her children. It became personal for people who had felt the sting of exclusion themselves. Those who had grown up feeling like outsiders in their own families, who had faced cultural or racial bias, or who had been told they were not enough to claim what they were entitled to. Meghan's story resonated because it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Some social justice advocates began posting under a new hashtag #LegacyDenied. They linked the situation to larger conversations about inheritance laws, racial dynamics in elite institutions, and intergenerational trauma. What had begun as a royal family feud had evolved into a cultural flashpoint. Amid the backlash, Meghan and Harry maintained their silence, at least officially. But those close to them began to leak controlled statements to trusted journalists. One insider told an American publication that Meghan was deeply hurt, but not surprised. Another said, "Harry is trying to shield his family from more pain, but this cut deep." Behind the scenes, Meghan's media team reportedly worked overtime to manage the narrative. They avoided inflammatory language, but made it clear that the Duchess felt the decision was unjust and in direct contradiction to Diana's love for her grandchildren. That subtle push created another wave of public response. Supporters began resharing videos of Diana with her sons, highlighting her nurturing nature, arguing that a woman so full of love would never want her grandson excluded. The narrative became emotional, even spiritual. Diana was no longer just a late princess. She was the mother figure whose intentions everyone claimed to speak for. The backlash extended into real-life protests. In London, outside Kensington Palace, a small group of Meghan and Harry supporters gathered holding signs that read, "Archie deserves Diana too," and "Stop silencing her legacy." Meanwhile, across from them stood counter-protesters with placards declaring, "Protect Diana's dignity," and "Legacy is earned, not claimed." Police kept the groups apart. The scene was peaceful, but tense, a microcosm of a nation, and indeed a world, increasingly split between old structures and new ideals. Even among royal watchers and longtime commentators, opinions splintered. Some who had once supported Meghan's entry into the family began to question the way Diana's image had been used in public narratives. Others, previously critical of the Sussexes, softened their stance in light of what they saw as an unnecessary act of exclusion. Meanwhile, Lady Sarah remained out of the spotlight. Her silence only fueled speculation. Some interpreted it as dignified restraint. Others saw it as calculated avoidance. Rumors swirled that she had declined multiple interview offers from respected media outlets, including the BBC and The Times. Her friends, however, began to speak on her behalf. "She's not trying to hurt anyone," said one longtime acquaintance. "She's fulfilling a promise. Diana asked her to guard her legacy, and that's exactly what she's doing." It's not about Meghan. It's about intention, about meaning. Still, the firestorm refused to die down. In a particularly viral moment, a well-known American activist hosted a live stream titled "Diana Belongs to No One," which drew nearly 500,000 views.